Well, good afternoon. I'm Genevieve Wood. I'm Senior Communications Advisor here at the Heritage Foundation. And on behalf of Heritage and the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute, we want to welcome you to December's Conservative Women's Network. It's also our once-a-year event where our speaker is a man. It's usually a woman. So this is our once-a-year event where we have a gentleman as a speaker. CWN, for those of you who aren't familiar, is made up of about 1,000 women around Washington, professionals, young professionals, middle professionals, people who want to come together, network, be able to talk with people in other different fields, both on Capitol Hill, but in other public policy organizations as well. And it's an opportunity to hear firsthand from conservative leaders. And I think there's no doubt that Congressman Mark Meadows is certainly a conservative leader. Mark Meadows, after 27 years as a successful small business leader, decided it was time to do something in Washington. He ran for office and was elected in 2012, and he's been representing the good constituents of the 11th District of North Carolina since that time in his third term. He serves on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Now, just over a year ago, Congressman Meadows was elected chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. It's a group of about 40 members who are really committed to making sure those who think their voices are not heard in Washington are indeed heard. Congressman Meadows is a champion of all things conservative. He is a champion of fiscal responsibility, of a government being accountable to the people. He's a leader when it comes to pro-life and pro-family policies, and he's a strong supporter of a strong national defense. Representative Meadows has been committed to conservative issues for many years. He and his wife Debbie have committed themselves to conservative causes and the conservative movement for many years. I know that firsthand because they've been supporters of more than one organization that I have been a part of, and it's been a pleasure getting to know them, and it's a pleasure now to welcome him up to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Meadows.
Thank you, Genevieve. Obviously, anytime that you get to come and talk about conservative causes, it's a good day. But particularly today, to be able to not only have the honor of getting to speak to so many of you who have been in the trenches fighting for conservative causes for a long time, but to do it at a time here on Capitol Hill when well, I guess every day is a new headline with regards to shutdowns and tax reform and, what's going to happen. And so I find it extremely not only an honor, but really a privilege to highlight what's happening behind the scenes. So I thought what we would do today is maybe have a family discussion about kind of what happens just a few short blocks from here. That maybe doesn't get reported, and so as we're here live, we'll probably make a little bit of news that hasn't been reported in the various periodicals that you have read, and so so I'll keep my remarks brief. So that we can have some question and answer, Genevieve, if that's okay with you, we'll do that. But I want to open with this. It's interesting when you're the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, you get either the credit or the blame for almost anything that happens that is opposite of what one party or the other wants to happen. So. For conservatives, they feel many times that a number of the Freedom Caucus members are the few voices on Capitol Hill who are willing to speak up for them. What we say is the forgotten man or woman, and it is imperative that we restore our confidence back in government, that it is a representative form of government. And far too often when people get elected, they forget that they actually, in my case, represent a little over 750,000 people, and that the voting card that we have, I often say this is our voting card. This one has my picture on it. And a lot of members think that once their picture gets on their voting card that it belongs to them. But indeed it does not. Mine belongs to the people of Western North Carolina. And the more that we remember that and remind our members that it is not their voting card, but it belongs to the people, I think the more conservative the policy we will get, and certainly as we look at it. So today I want to talk about perhaps, I guess what we would is use two P's: the policy and the pragmatic way that we get it done. So policy and pragmatism would be the two areas that we do. But before I do that, I thought it would be interesting. I got this Bloomberg Alert the other day. My communications director sent this to me, and anytime that you get mentioned on the floor of the Senate, it is normally not a good day for a conservative member of Congress. But on this particular one, what I think was meant to be a slight, we took as a compliment. And it says, Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer says that House Speaker Paul Ryan needs to stand up to the House Freedom Caucus because it's trying to derail negotiations on a long-term government spending plan. He went on to say that he believes that the military, of which I'm a strong proponent of a national defense and for national security reasons, believe that we need to increase the spending there. But he went on further to say that the military and domestic economic growth portions of spending need to be treated equally. So what he is essentially saying is we need to increase defense and we need to increase every other aspect of the government at the same level. Now, he's saying that regardless of need. Now, we have a lot of facts that would suggest that our military men and women, because of sequestration, are falling way behind some of our enemies abroad, and that we need to actually do that. And so Schumer went on to say that Democrats and Republicans were otherwise making good progress on the spending talks until the Freedom Caucus got involved. Now, I think he meant that as a negative. Obviously, we see that as fighting for the millions of men and women who believe that what we have to do is start to get some type of control of our federal spending. We're in the midst of a tax reform debate. And so I'm here to tell you, I believe that not only will we have a tax reform bill signed into law by December 21st, I think it potentially could be a few days earlier than that. And it's time. It's time that we start giving back the American taxpayers' money back to them. Yeah, I was really shocked when I got here to Washington, D.C. People started talking in ways that truly we don't talk about in North Carolina or any other state when you're on Main Street. I think they teach their kids here in Washington, D.C. how to start counting $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion instead of 1, 2, 3. I mean, they raise the numbers in such a way. They talk about a rounding error being $2 or $3 billion. And yet, for my constituents and for the people in this room, and certainly for the people that you know, it is your money. It is not the federal government's money, and we need to be wise, efficient stewards of that. So some of the drama, I think one of the headlines said there was drama on the House floor on Monday as it related to a vote to go to conference. So would you guys like to know kind of the backstory on what happened that particular night? So here's what happens. I was actually out for a run on Monday morning with my wife. We were running and trying to get rid of a little bit of turkey and dressing. And so as we were out for a run, I was thinking about, well, how do we make sure that we get a tax reform bill done? Because we in the House have been complaining about the Senate for a very long time. We said, if they would just go with a 50-vote threshold, get rid of the 60-vote cloture, we would be able to solve a lot of things, because there are a lot of people who said, you know what? You asked for the Senate, we gave you the Senate. You had the House and the Senate, and you couldn't get things done. Then you said, well, if you just give us the House, the Senate, and the White House, we will get things done. So what did the American people do? They gave us the House, the Senate, and the White House. The expectations were unbelievable, and then the delivery was less than desirable. And so here we are today with this frustration that says people who giving their hard-earned dollars to support candidates, people who were out waving signs, perhaps even making homemade signs to make sure that we took over all the branches, both the House and the Senate, and certainly the White House, and yet the results continue to get held up in the Senate. So for me, when I saw that they actually got 51 votes in the Senate for a tax reform bill, I said, you know what? We need to not play around with this, because you never know when there's one senator or two that will go rogue and decide to change their vote and go the other way. So I got with my good friend Jim Jordan from Ohio, and I said, really what I think would be the best plan would be actually to not officially go to conference. Let's leave that bill sitting there where technically the House could just sign the Senate bill and send it to the president. It needs fixing. It needs help. But at the worst case scenario, we would have some relief. We know that the Senate bill, we could pass it and send it on. But by going to conference, what you automatically do is you take that off the table. And you take it back where you put it back in the House and the Senate. And you still are at the mercy of one or two senators in the Senate. So we felt like that if we actually didn't make a motion to go to conference, but we allowed that conference to happen just in a ad hoc way, that we would actually have the best of both worlds. We would have a bill that had been passed out of the Senate that we could pass in the House and send to the president, but we could continue to negotiate and make it better, and everybody would have the same incentive. So as many of you've read, we went to the House floor to hold up enough votes. The Freedom Caucus wanted to focus on tax reform and make sure that we kept it there. And so we had enough votes to make sure that we didn't go to conference. Well, you've all read about that and you know that part of it, but just a few minutes before the vote, I get a call from the president aboard Air Force One who said that he was concerned about not going to conference and that we needed to reconsider. Now, anytime that you get a call from the president, you not only take it, but you normally start out by, yes, sir, and I understand, sir. And so as he was sharing some of his concerns, I started to lay out what I just laid out for you. I said, don't you think, Mr. President, that it would be a good idea if we kept a bill that potentially is still being able to be acted upon in the House? And so I had those kind of conversations with him. He was thinking about it. Obviously, he was in transit between out west and coming back to the Oval Office. And he encouraged me to talk to the Speaker. Now, the Speaker actually was not here in Washington, D.C., and so I committed to do that. Well, you may have seen the drama on the House floor then. There, the votes are not there. We're holding up our votes. We went out. I talked to the Speaker. We had a long conversation. And for us, it really boiled down to two things. One is we believe that we need to be very fast about getting this tax reform done. We don't need to open it up and negotiate every single aspect that we've been negotiating for the last 10 months. We need to keep it narrow. In my opinion, we need to make sure that middle-income wage earners get real relief. We need to make sure that small businesses actually get the tax relief and not just a few small businesses. We believed, some of us, that the mortgage interest deduction should stay where it is today and not be lowered like it was in the House bill. And so there was 4 or 5 components that we put in there in terms of fixing things that we saw at odds with the two. But as we looked at that, I shared that with the Speaker, there was one other area. This whole idea of spending, and as you know now, history from yesterday, we passed a short-term spending bill through December the 22nd. Now, that's to suggest that we didn't know that December 8th was on the calendar for 3 months and that the deadline would have been December 8th. And I think it's time that members of Congress have a plan to get things done and not wait till the last minute. You don't run your households or your businesses that way. It is certainly not appropriate for running the largest economy in the world with a, I guess, speed up, stop, and hope for the best kind of strategy. So here we were, the conversations were going off. I actually had another conversation with the president that night, and I'm always cautious to not share the details of conversations with the president. But here is the backstory. Ultimately, the president and the speaker encouraged us to go ahead and go to conference. So indeed, we released the votes. The House Freedom Caucus supplied the votes so that we could go to conference. You now know that the Senate voted yesterday to go to conference, so we're officially there. And yet, at the same time, I think there's a clear understanding on a couple of different points. One is we need to get tax reform done in the next week to 10 days. That the land and the time of promise for future victories is over. You know, I don't know about you, but I've heard too many times, we're going to fight for something at a point in the future, only to be disappointed. But there is another fight that is coming up that you really need to be aware of, and that is on December 22nd. My fear is that based on Chuck Schumer and his continued direction in one way, that they're going to require to plus up every federal government program and agency across this town to levels that we have not seen since the Obama stimulus was voted into law. Now, that is troubling because when you're looking at numbers, you're looking at numbers that could close, if you add in the supplemental for Puerto Rico and Texas and some of the legitimate needs that are there, you could look at a spending bill that is close to $200 billion. Now, when you look at levels like that, it is unsustainable. And so what do we need to do as conservatives? One, we have to understand the policy, but the pragmatic side of this and actually getting things into play means that we have to set realistic deadlines. I do not believe that December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, makes for good decisions, other than what you're going to get for your son or daughter or granddaughter, or in my case, my new granddaughter. You know, those are the kind of decisions that you need to be making just a few days before Christmas. Well, my wife would say long before a few days before Christmas. And so here's what I would ask all of you to do. You have been involved in the conservative movement. You truly have a conservative not only credentials, but you have at your very core what you believe to be right and wrong. And yet in that, how does that get watered down in this place? What we need to be doing, and here's the pragmatic side of things, we need to be putting together bills that make people vote on things that perhaps they wouldn't normally want to vote on. For example, when we did a relief package for Puerto Rico and, for Florida and Texas, why did we not put in some kind of reforms to the flood program that has been underwater, pun intended, for a long time? Why did we not put that on there and then dare our Democrat colleagues to vote against it in the Senate? Why do we not start to couple things to make the decisions difficult? So here is my ask of all of you. As we start to look at this, you know, I have no special gifts other than the fact that I've negotiated all my life. And I look at pressure points. And when you have those pressure points, those are the only times that you get concessions. Those are the only times that you get people to truly start to come together and say, I don't want to give you this, you don't want to give up that, but if we come together, we can make that happen. For far too long, conservatives have conceded that policy ground because they're being pragmatic and saying, well, we just got to get something done. Now, we're a basketball state in North Carolina, and what we call that is going into the four-corner prevent defense when you're down by 20 points. The only thing that you're doing is guaranteeing that you will lose by less points than you would have before. I think it is time that the American people see a win. It is time that we actually start to make for those difficult votes. Now, will that mean that we have all kinds of conservative wins? No, quite frankly, there will be concessions that have to be made. But better the concessions be made in the middle of a negotiation where you have a difficult vote than that we just give it up and not put it on the table at all. So I would ask you to reach out to your senators and your members and encourage them to not only take tough votes. We say that the Senate takes more naps than they do votes. It is time. Now that'll be a quotable moment. I can tell you that's, but we often say that in the House that, you know, they need to just take a few more votes. And even if it fails, what the American people want to see us do is fight and try to do that. So I know we've got a lot of good questions here, and so here's what I would give you one more behind-the-scenes story. As we look at tax reform, so much of what has come out on tax reform has been because of what we call in the Freedom Caucus the power of negation. It's not the fact that we have all the power to suggest that we're going to get this thing done or that thing done, because quite frankly, a lot of members of the Freedom Caucus are not on the committees of jurisdiction. But because our bylaws allow us to take official positions and stay together and say that we're not going to vote for something until we get it right on behalf of the American people, ultimately what happens is that we get brought into those negotiations. And so I would ask you to be part of the power of negation as well. Because when you say no to something, what happens is there's power in that. Now you can't frustrate people and you can't say I'm going to be no always, or you never get brought into the negotiation. But we have to make sure that we're there. Sometimes things are not always as they seem. And I share this true story over and over again, and I'll close with this because we'll have plenty of time for questions. Sometimes things are not always as they seem. When I got here to Congress, I thought that all you had to do is come up with a good policy, a pragmatic way to get it there, and ultimately everybody would come together and embrace that idea. That's what happens in business. Well, it doesn't happen in Washington, D.C. So the true story, from the mountains of North Carolina, we were about 45 minutes away from the closest Walmart. So you know we're in the middle of nowhere if we're 45 minutes away from a Walmart. So we were 45 minutes away from a Walmart. The Episcopal priest's wife was going down to give a women's speech, and so as she traveled down the mountain, she was going through the curvy mountains and getting down. Well, she realized that she didn't have any pantyhose, and wanting to make sure that she made a good impression on the ladies that she was speaking to, she decides to pull into the Walmart and buy some pantyhose. So she parks in the parking lot, jumps out of the car, runs into the Walmart, buys some pantyhose, comes running back out, jumps in her car and gets ready to take off, and realizes that there's not a place to put them on between the Walmart parking lot and where she's going to give the speech. So she makes a decision to put them on in the front seat of her car. So without getting too graphic, you can kind of imagine, how difficult that is. And so all of a sudden she got this weird sense that somebody was looking in the window at her. She looks over her left-hand shoulder, and sure enough, there is this person looking in the window at her. She opens the door and says, "What do you want, you pervert?" And he says, "I don't know, ma'am, but you're sitting in my car." True story from the mountains of North Carolina. So sometimes things are not always as they seem. And I guess what I would ask of each one of you is to be engaged, be close enough to realize that when you read a headline, you can see behind the scenes and maybe open that up just a little bit to say, you know what, I don't believe that. We need to make sure that we stay forceful in our conservative principles. I'm here to tell you, having traveled from Maine to California, from Michigan to Florida and everywhere in between, this is a conservative country, even though many in the media would have you try to believe otherwise. And so I want to thank you for being committed month after month, year after year, to the conservative cause and making a difference on Capitol Hill. I can tell you your advocacy not only makes a difference in policy, but also is starting to change the pragmatic part of giving people like me and the Freedom Caucus the courage to stand up for the forgotten man or woman. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions, and we'll open it up right now for that. Thanks. Thank you. All right, so questions. Got one right there. Yeah.
Just wanted to confirm, why is it that you feel that by the 21st, the spending bill might be passed, and what could we expect after the 22nd, whether it's passed or not?
Okay, so spending, the 21st is really where I believe by the 21st will be tax reform, but I do think that there will be a spending bill that we will actually bring up in the House before the 21st. So in fact, our leadership is committed to that, so we're working right now to try to come up with a package that we can pass out of the House before the 21st. If it does not receive the attention in the Senate, and there are some who would suggest, myself included, that the package that we believe is adequate and appropriate will not receive the attention in the Senate, because we passed 12 appropriations bills for the first time in 6 years in the House. It went over there and sat in the Senate, and nothing happened with it. So I fully expect that if that does not, the spending side of that does not get done by the 22nd, that you will have two outcomes. Perhaps a new caps deal that would be at levels that I think most conservatives would object to, and perhaps a very short-term CR that gets us from the 22nd of December into maybe the first part of January. The reason I think on tax reform being on the president's desk by the 21st, all the conferees are working very hard. I know I had a conversation with at least one senator and two House members this morning on trying to fix some of those things, and I think everybody believes that this is not a fine wine. It doesn't improve with time, and that we need to narrow that out and make sure that we get it at the president's desk before we go home for Christmas. Great question. Did you have a follow-up?
Sure, I'm reporting on behalf of Reuters.
Okay, great.
Just wanted to know if there are any concerns that you or other members of the Freedom Caucus have that might hold up the votes necessary for the 22nd.
Well, I think we all have expressed those. As you may have seen on the House floor, since you were a reporter yesterday, I'm sure you did see this. We waited, in terms of only providing enough votes to make sure that we didn't have a government shutdown. We had more than enough votes in the Freedom Caucus to make sure that we didn't pass the continuing resolution. We could have stopped it. We talked to the leadership. This was their play call. This is what they believed that would happen. And so what would happen there? If you get a spending bill that has 150 to $200 billion plus up with a DACA fix in it, with a number of other, perhaps even FISA reauthorization that some of us have a problem with. We believe that there needs to be some FISA reauthorization reforms before we, and that is, for the foreign surveillance. Those things getting added in could be very problematic, and yet, just to be truthful, is if you plus up spending enough, the Freedom Caucus is a non-leverage point because you'll get enough Democrats to come across and vote for it. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm Sally Lunderman. I'm a graduate of Leadership Institute and a member of the Commonwealth Republican Women's Club and the Virginia Federation of Republican Women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you sound like one of my constituents. God bless you is all I can say.
Yes, sir. What I'm concerned about in the tax bill, could you speak a little bit of how it's going to help seniors? Because it's a big body of seniors, the baby boomers, et cetera, that are retiring, and we need a livable wage, as prices keep going up and to support ourselves. So what is the tax reform going to be doing for us as senior citizens?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's probably one of the things that when I look at the demographics of my district that we have been perhaps more focused on than anything else. When I look at my district, I represent the western part of North Carolina, and so I'm not running for Senate, so I can say it's the pretty part of North Carolina, and it's the mountainous areas, but we have all kinds of people that retire there, and so with that, we're looking keenly about those that are on fixed incomes, and as we start to look, the doubling of the standard deduction does help some, but it's also one of the reasons why some of the Senate levels probably get adopted. I mean, we went from 3 levels in the original proposal in terms of income levels in the House. We ended up at 4. And the Senate is at 7. And so part of that is we'll probably end up with more to make sure that we can get those down so that every level actually gets a tax cut. But that brings up one other area. When we're looking at for those who are about to go on to Medicare and those who are on Medicare, healthcare costs is one that can obliterate the savings that we're putting there. And so to completely ignore the repeal of Obamacare, to completely ignore the co-pays and the additional premiums that will come with Medicare if you're on Medicare, is ignoring what we're doing. We give a break here and we allow, I was talking to somebody in their 60s just the other day, and they said their insurance premiums have popped up by $500 a month. Well, $150 savings in tax still puts them in the hole in real dollars, and that's what you were talking about, by $350. So I think on the tax reform, I do believe that we'll get it right for our seniors. There's a big pushback on some of it where we were with medical costs and not allowing that to be deducted. I know that has gone back and forth in real rigorous debate on how we address that to make sure that doesn't penalize those that are either retiring or about to retire or still working as seniors and just not with the same level of earning potential. And so in the next week to 10 days, I believe that part hits it. We will repeal the individual mandate in this tax bill. And by repealing that, we will start, hopefully, to work with the administration to bring down some of those premiums that have the biggest cost. The big problem that I see with cost of living adjustments, we sometimes figure those based on, iPhones and cars and all kinds of stuff, when a lot of people that are on fixed incomes, it's more about groceries and gas and the things that they buy each and every day than sometimes the way that we figure that. So my mom, who is 80 years old, she reminds me on a regular basis we need to get this right. But thank you. Any others?
Good afternoon. On your bio, I noticed you were dedicated to giving a voice to those forgotten by the government. I'm one of those people because, number one, I live in the District of Columbia. Basically, no representation. Secondly, my family and I arrived here from Eastern Europe legally, became naturalized citizens, followed all the rules.
Where in Eastern Europe?
Latvia.
Okay.
And I struggled to earn my education. I'm quite educated. All I got was a plaque saying I did a wonderful job in school, and no help with my education costs, no job opportunities. And as I'm applying for jobs, I'm seeing that H-1B visa holders and green card holders are getting those jobs that I actually applied for and qualified. That's why I feel like I'm the forgotten, unemployed, educated. what is Congress planning to do about people like this? Because all I'm hearing is protests from the other side. In fact, I live in it. There are days those protests won't let me out the door. Yeah, I'm very affected by it. What help? What help is there?
So let me hit that in two different pieces, and I'll hit the one that probably, if you're in Washington, D.C., is not good news, is I see very little, if any, chance of they're actually looking at a statehood. I know the mayor is in support of that. I know most of the residents of D.C. are in support of that. But both constitutionally and really the way that we look at that particular issue, I don't see statehood in Washington, D.C. because of the way that it was originally set up to be our nation's capital, and taking property from Maryland and Virginia and the like. I'm actually on the committee that is over Washington, D.C., so this is something that I've had a number of conversations about. That there is no help that is on the way anytime soon on that particular issue. Now, there have been some who says, well, we'll be glad to give you representation and take half the people from Washington, D.C. and put them in Maryland, the other half back in Virginia, and you could actually get representation in terms of your members of Congress from a voting standpoint. Eleanor Holmes Norton obviously is the delegate from here in D.C. I serve with her on two different committees, and we have a great relationship, but obviously are very different on this particular subject in terms of where we come at it. But let me just go to the other side of that. There were many people who believe that your ability to lobby Congress is actually disproportionate because of your location. And the fact that you're here today may actually validate that you can be here where someone from perhaps Florida or California may have a more difficult time having a one-on-one with a member of Congress. When it gets to the visa issue, whether it's H-1Bs or H-2Bs, I think there's 87 different types of visas, and people, we're looking at all of this in the context of DACA and Dreamers, but we really need immigration reform. We need to make sure that as we look at being an open society that brings in the best from across the world as U.S. citizens and welcomes them in, that we also don't disadvantage those who have come here legally from Eastern Europe and who have been educated to work the same. So I would say three things. One is full immigration reform that allows for a very speedy process for legal immigration. One of the frustrations I have is there's more of a incentive to break the laws and come here than to go through the normal process, both from an expense and a time standpoint. And we can do better than that. We've made that so bureaucratic that if you have a queue that works, I think it de-emphasizes illegal immigration the minute you have a legal path to do that. The other is to make sure that from a job standpoint, that we're not importing talent at the expense of the talent that we have here. And we've seen that in some of, you mentioned the H-1Bs, where they bring in H-1B visa holders, and what they're doing is they can get that cheaper than perhaps paying you with the, not always, but sometimes they can. And in doing that is taking those who have come through the legal process, U.S. citizens, at their expense. One of the proposals we had was to work with the employment security commissions, that's what they call it in my state, but where unemployment gets meted out, which you make sure that if you have a real need for foreign labor, that it gets placed appropriately, but not at your expense. The last thing is that we still live in a country that is the American dream. Yesterday I talked to a CEO of a Fortune 50 company, and she shared with me her ability to come here with nothing with her family. It escaped from really the horrors of Nazi Germany. And as she's come here, she's educated. She's not only came and worked the American dream, but it was really her ancestors who, bought a small piece of property in a very undesirable place in New York and then started to build a real estate empire because we are the land of opportunity. And yet now she is the CEO of one of the largest companies in the United States. I think the highest paid female executive in the country. And this is a story about someone who came here and who lived the American dream. I'm a big proponent of doing that, but I'm also one of understanding that there is a cost associated with anything. I mean, when you go if you hand out everything, the value of that is not necessarily what everybody would take hold of. We need to make sure that we are not a socialized education or healthcare entity. And many of the people who can see the advantages or disadvantages of that come from countries, like yours and others. In Cuba, I mean, some of the most patriotic people in Florida, I used to live in Florida a long time, were those who came from Cuba who had escaped communism in Cuba, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it because they've experienced the lack in Cuba. And so that's a long answer to try to answer a very complicated thing, but here's what I think we do. Legalize, make our legalized immigration system much more robust and quick, at the same time not at the expense of U.S. citizens and workers. And then the last thing is to make sure that when we do that, we put in a system in place that doesn't allow future bureaucracies to take it to a point where they just keep adding on. I see no reason to have 87 different types of visas. Why don't we have 10 I could work it down to 10 categories and say, okay, this is a visa for this. Once you get that large, you can't manage it. But I'll be glad to have a follow-up conversation with you and get your details and see how we can help. And even though I am not your representative here in D.C., I represent the United States and our great country and the Constitution. I'll be glad to help. All right, thank you. Yes.
Representative, this is more of a philosophical question and something I don't know if you get asked very often, but I'm just curious, as a younger conservative, when I talk to other folks that are young conservatives, I think that the feeling right now, as a lot of us are thinking about getting involved in politics or taking jobs in Washington or even in state houses, the morale is very dismal and there's not a lot of inspiration or hope. And so I'm just curious for you, are there great thinkers, are there writings, are there historical figures that you particularly turn to look for inspiration and hope during this time as a member serving in Congress that we might also find some hope and inspiration in as well?
Well, this can be a very depressing place, and no, I think that's the first time I've ever gotten that question, and so here it is. I will just tell you, I'm a person of the Christian faith, and so for me, my hope is not really in this place. My hope is in my Heavenly Father, and that's for me personally. For some who may not have that faith, here's the hope for conservatives. There are a lot of things that supposedly will never happen, that happen every single day around us. I mean, when you think about, I can remember, you're not old enough to remember this, I wouldn't think, but I can remember when I saw a president say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, that was a historic moment, but no one believed that the wall was going to come down at that point. Now, I can tell you, I was in Berlin just a few months ago, walking where that wall was, and it's not there. There's little pieces of it there that are a reminder of what was there. And they're more in a museum context. But when the president said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, he was told not to say that. Don't, because you may be embarrassed because nothing's going to happen. You don't want to take a bold stand. And I'm here to encourage you as a young conservative to be bold in what you believe, to also believe that the unachievable happens each and every day in America. It's the American dream that we were just talking about. It's the fact that a guy came from very humble beginnings and actually has lived the American dream and ultimately serves in the most powerful place on the face of the globe. And so I guess what I would do is not believe all the people who say that nothing will happen. You know, I tell the story in the rotunda of the Capitol, just a few blocks from here, is a picture of some of the pilgrims who came over for religious persecution purposes from Holland. And so as they're there, there is one particular, ship. The rainbow is actually red, white, and blue. It's not the normal colors of a rainbow. And there's a person there that has a Bible that is open, and they were showing that they were escaping because they wanted to come to a different place to worship freely. Now, I share that story because that particular person is Elder William Brewster. Now, Elder William Brewster, that may be the first time that you've ever heard that name. But in my lineage, it's not the first time that I've ever heard it. He's actually my 11th great-grandfather. So when you look at, there was no way that he ever thought that his portrait would be in the rotunda of the most powerful place on the face of the globe, because he was coming to a wilderness. I mean, this was not the United States at this point. He was just escaping because he believed in the unbelievable. And yet, he also didn't know that in that same rotunda where his portrait is, that his 11th great-grandson would have the honor of serving the people of North Carolina in the most powerful place. So believe the unbelievable, and my message to you and to other conservatives is when they tell you it can't be done, just remind them of the miraculous things that have been done because people have dared to believe. Great question. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay, I think we got time for one last question. If you've got one last question, and if not, I'll... One last question? Yes, ma'am. I like your sweater, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is about immigration. How much money is the United States losing because illegals are here and they haven't paid any money to us?
I think, so the question is how much money are we losing from illegals who are here that haven't paid into the system? I don't know that anyone actually knows. I mean, there have been a number of great thinkers. In fact, here at Heritage, you can find a number of people who can put together a very plausible financial argument for that in terms of where they are. But here's the cost. One is dollars and cents, but the other is in a number of other areas. We're sitting here debating about immigration, and it will be the topic over the next 2 weeks like you've never seen. You know, it will be actually the topic of whether we're going to have a shutdown or whether we're going to give in here or there. But really, we're not talking about immigration, we're talking about people. And ultimately, when we're talking about people, what we have to understand is the hidden costs or the actual costs of not dealing with a situation. Some of those costs are unbelievably high. You know, when we look at a diversity lottery like we have, which basically says, regardless of the country of origin, we're going to allow people to come in, and they end up conducting terrorist activities in New York City, the cost of that is not measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in blood and tears. And so to get this right, what we have to do is to perhaps take very tough stance. I've been negotiating on the immigration side of it from a conservative's point of view for many, many weeks now, and trying to find that sweet spot. So one is the cost. Certainly it's in the billions of dollars. We know that. The exact amount, you know, you don't ever know what you don't know. And so in that, we only have estimates that people make in terms of where we have it, in terms of the number of people that are here. But the other part of that is we do know that if we're going to have a country, you have to have a secure border. You also have to understand that when you have a secure border, you have rules And ours are really the Constitution and a rule of law. So the more that you go with sanctuary cities and all these other things, it's dealing with situations that we should deal with appropriately in a real way. And so I can tell you that on some of the programs that we're looking at that have been actually very difficult to actually hone in on, we're going to try to address some of those costs as it relates to the tax reform bill. One of those is with the additional earned income tax credit to make sure that there's a Social Security number for those that actually get paid that reimbursement. But I am hopeful. Getting back to the comment I just made, the unachievable is achievable if you are willing to put your reputation on the line and actually get out there. I'll close with this. You have to hold this job, the job I'm in, very loosely. Because the minute that you want to hold on to it, and I give that, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you get that precious and you're just holding on to precious. The minute you start to try to hold on to this member's pin that tightly, you don't make decisions in the best interest of your constituents. So you have to hold it loosely to say that we're willing to tackle the tough issues, to achieve the unachievable. And if we do that, then what happens sometimes, the decisions we make may send us home. But you know what? Being a member of Congress should not be a career. It should be a calling. And if it's a calling, we'll make it work. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, Congressman Meadows. And on behalf of Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute, I know you walked in and you had a dirty "no good deed goes unpunished" mug, but we'd like to give you your own.
I will
And
use
then-
it and drink from it often. Thank you.
And then also a bag with the logo on it. So,
Wonderful.
and I think Heritage also has a gift for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank you, guys.